Hello and welcome to the Against the Law podcast. We're delighted to welcome you, listener, to our second season. Last season we talked about love, food, hospitals and much more. But next up, we're bringing you a new look today at our current hot topic. We're hoping to fill the gap in your knowledge about clothing in the ancient world. If we talk about something we deem against the law about the ancient world, you can expect to hear this noise. That's the sound of the misconception gavel dispelling myths left, right and centre. As usual, we're joined by Xenia, our cute-as-a-button fan of all things ancient Rome. We're also joined by Meg, who has us all in stitches with her tales from ancient Greece. There's Barney, who's quick to zip in with a quip about the ancient Near East, and I am delighted to introduce our wonderful guest, Caroline Lawrence. She's the author of the Roman Mysteries novels, a fantastic series of history mystery stories for kids. Today, she's rolling up her sleeves and joining us on this special first podcast of the season. I'm Flo, and I'll be keeping things Gucci as I learn with you, our listeners. I don't know much about the ancient world, but I've got my thinking cap on, and I'm ready to buckle down. So, ancient clothing. So my first and foremost in my mind is I want to know about pockets, because you're not seeing many pockets in friezes or in ancient art, and I want to know, did women have pockets?
I think nobody had pockets, actually. Why didn't they just invent them? It's one of those things that until you invent it, you don't really think about it. But they did have a version of pockets. And it was only when I was doing my most recent project, which I was working with the Cambridge School's Latin project to make an online history course for Key Stage 3 kids. That's like kids aged 12 to 14, set in Pompeii. And Cambridge recruited a great team, Sophie Hay, the archaeologist who actually lived and dug in Pompeii for about 10 or 12 years, Andrew Wallace Hadrill, otherwise known as Mr. Herculaneum, and Laura Jenkinson, who does amazing Greek myth comics illustrations. And then I was recruited to write the story. And so the story was to be centered around a slave called Amarantus, who actually lived in this house and bar in Pompeii. I kept just naturally having him drop things down the front of his tunic. And then recently, I've realized that there is a word for the front of the tunic. In Greek, it's kolpos, which is often translated as the fold in your toga. But actually, I think it probably more often represents that fold that's caused by blousing your tunic when you tie it, or chiton in Greek. And then in Latin, it's sinus, which means bay, S-I-N-U-S, which means a fold or a bay. And suddenly I notice it everywhere. People are always putting things in their bosom, is the word it's translated as today. So this was just a revelation to me. And I got it. This is the ancient form of a pocket, is popping something in the fold of your toga or cloak. But that, it's going to fall out, isn't it? Put it down the front of your tunic. Bob's your uncle.
When you're going clubbing and you don't have any pockets, I mean, obviously haven't been clubbing for a while, but when we used to do things like that in the pre-pandemic world and you didn't have any pockets and you just put your phone, your keys, everything in your bra. So we definitely still have that kind of, if there isn't a pocket, you make one up.
I'm very excited to tell this story about the fold in the tunic to my girlfriend, who used to keep her kitten in the front pocket of her dungarees.
Oh, that is so cute.
It hears your heartbeat and it's warm and it's right there. And also, if it's a kitten, and I do have that in one of my books, I've written some books called The Roman Quests. And in the first one, Escape from Rome, little plug there, little girl called Ursula, who loves animals, finds a stray kitten as they're being pursued out of Rome by the emperor's men. And she puts the kitten down the front of her tunic, but it has little razor sharp claws. So you can kind of imagine, but luckily she's got the under tunic of linen and the over tunic of wool. So she kind of sandwiches it down there between the linen tunic and the woolen tunic.
So here's a question. So you're saying that there's an undertunic. So bear in mind, I don't know anything about clothing in the ancient world. I'm quite attached to my undergarments. I don't know where I'd be without my bra. Was there any safekeeping of ancient boobies in the ancient world? That's what I want to know.
Yes, there was. And my favorite poet for the concrete world of ancient Rome is Martial. And he writes these little wonderful tweet length epigrams. And he writes one about a breastband for a woman who's generously endowed. So, and I think, it's like, imagine a kind of like a sports band that you wrap around your knee or something. It would have been a bit like that. You kind of wrap it around. It's probably linen because linen is soft next to the skin. It absorbs body odors, doesn't need washing that much. So yeah, they absolutely had a bra. Probably they didn't really wear I know there's a word for underwear, subligatia or something, but I don't think they wore underwear often. In fact, they often didn't wear any clothes at all. There's several professions where they went completely naked. And just as a segue into that, if you think of ancient Greece, you think of Socrates, all those statues of Socrates and frescoes showing him just in kind of a blanket and nothing else. And that's probably what men wore around the Athenian agora. Women weren't probably allowed in the agora, maybe a few slave women or prostitutes or whatever. But so men went around dressed in a light blanket, and you can imagine all sorts of shocking views as they sat down or flapped themselves or whatever.
So it's like, Socrates, you've had an epiphany. Oh no, let me just readjust my blanket.
Socrates, that's more information than I really wanted to know.
I really like the idea that at the moment during the pandemic, quite a lot of us will be just hanging around at home, probably in just a blanket. So we haven't really changed very much, have we?
And there's another great thing is I was doing this story set in Pompeii, I have a slave girl go down to the seaport, and half the sailors are completely starkers because we know from a relief from Ostia that it shows them going up and down the gangplank carrying their amphorae naked with no clothes on. If you think about it, you don't want to wear clothes when you're a fisherman. You're going to get wet and damp and you're handling fish and stuff like that. So there were quite a few jobs where they did it with no clothes on at all, including being an athlete,
That's true. Well, since you've taken us to the seaside, because we're near fishermen and sailors, Xenia, I know you've got a story about seashells and a mountain of them.
Yeah, so this relates to the dye that was used to dye clothes. And one of the most expensive forms of dye was called Tyrion Purple. Tyrion, not related to Game of Thrones, but actually related to the place, Tyre, which is still actually a city on the coast of Lebanon. So that was the main sort of center of production for this color purple. And it comes from a specific type of mollusk that lives in the sea. And they would get all of these mollusks out of the sea and crush them. And it smells really bad as well, this whole process. And out of these crushed mollusks comes this purplish red color. Sometimes it's described as red. So this was the process that they used for getting this color purple, and it was very expensive to make. So any clothes that were dyed in this color were also very expensive. So it was reserved for when we get Imperial Rome, it was reserved for emperors or very, very wealthy people. And it's just, you reminded me of the story about the mountain. I think in a previous episode we talked about the mountain in Rome that's just made of little pot shards. Well, this mountain in Taranto in Italy is made entirely of these mollusk shells. So that's how much they used. It was, even though it's expensive, it was big business. This was luxury clothing in the ancient world.
So you mentioned that the process was quite smelly. Does that mean that the dye was quite smelly then, and that people in the ancient world were walking around stinking all the time?
Absolutely. In fact, Martial, the Latin epigrammist, who's my favorite author for getting ideas about the tangible, touchable, smellable, tasteable world of ancient Rome, the concrete world, he says you can often smell a rich man coming by the stink of their purple cloak, because it really stinks. It smells terrible. It smells of seafood. then also, of course, I was reading that we all know to clean Roman clothes, you use urine and sulfur. So they might stink of rotten eggs and pee if you'd had them washed. But as soon as you wash a garment, its value goes down. And we know this because clothes were so expensive that they were often put in people's wills or left to people as part of their legacy. And as soon as it had been washed, its value decreases. So originally, a woolen cloak would have smelled like of sheep or lanolin. So you've got people walking around smelling like sheep, seafood, pee, rotten eggs, and fish.
That's the price of fashion, isn't it? Just being really stinky all the time. I find that really interesting that rich people, you could smell them coming, because here in England, in the House of Lords, it used to be the case that when it had been a rainy, hot day, you could smell urine in the House of Lords, because the tweed was treated in the same way up until relatively quite recently. So urine, I think the urea in it flattens the fibres or something, or makes them tighter. So on a hot, wet day, the House of Lords smelled like a urinal. So I love how things don't really change.
That is a genius fact. And that brings me to my second fun fact, is why one reason red was so prestigious is because it's apotropaic. The color red, like the color of blood or life, keeps away evil. And this is one of my obsessions with the ancient world. I don't know if there's a clangor for obsessions, but you should definitely ring it whenever I say apotropaic. Because I think that almost every object in ancient Roman times, and probably Greek too, though I don't know that world quite as well, had a primary function, but also a secondary function to keep away evil. And lots of children's garments have red because children were particularly vulnerable. And also they often had borders that would confuse a demon, because demons have a very tiny attention span, and you can easily distract them. You can't kill them, but you can either frighten them away or distract them. And blood red might frighten them away, but a little complicated border might distract them. And it wasn't just sight, but sounds distracted a demon, like the sound of a little bell, which was rung at funerals to keep away evil. Or here's another instance of hearing someone rich coming. Instead of smelling, you could often hear a rich woman who wore earrings with little pearls that clacked together. And they were called crotala, which means castanets. And that was probably also to keep away evil, to distract demons.
Wow. So, well, it's a good thing that people were distracting demons, because I imagine you can't run very fast in sandals.
I think a lot of them went barefoot too. That's another thing we don't think of. There's if you think of especially slaves just being barefoot and stuff. But yeah, absolutely. You can't run away from them. You've got to distract them or reflect them back, which you often do with the evil eye. They had something very similar in ancient Greece, almost everywhere, even in designs on children's clothes and stuff like that, little eyes. They often would also put knots in clothes, because knot means to bind. You can bind an evil spirit, and a knot would bind an evil spirit. They often tied on little bags of herbs. They often find coins that have been pierced and then sewn onto a garment, because that will distract a demon too. So all this decoration is to actually protect the wearer.
You mentioning there about the different colors got me thinking about the meaning of certain materials in ancient Egypt. And a lot of the materials that we associate with Egyptian royalty, from famous images like the Mask of Tutankhamun, each material on that had a particular meaning. So to the Egyptians, gold was the flesh of the gods and silver was the gods' bones. And their hair was made of lapis. And all these wonderful kind of symbolisms of these materials that we commonly associate with royalty. But I think that's quite an intense one, that if you were wearing something golden, you were wearing the flesh of a god.
That's brilliant. And I think we forget that everything does have symbolism. Every color had a meaning, and every every substance had a meaning too. You know, for example, you couldn't wear a gold ring unless you were of a certain class in Rome. It wasn't really allowed.
It's interesting in terms of clothing that because there's just in ancient Greece anyway, there's just not very many options in terms of clothes. Like I say that it's in relative terms compared to how many we have now that you get up in the morning and you can wear pretty much anything and you can go out about your daily life. But obviously in ancient Greece they just had so few things. So we had the chitons or chitons that you mentioned earlier, Caroline, and then like the peplos, which is a sort of a slightly more formal dress, and then cloaks and shawls and stuff like that. But apart from that, there's such a few ways with clothes to sort of express your identity that we end up, like you say, getting quite a lot of symbolism attached to certain things. So certain clothing, even if to us, say, we'd look at it and be like, hang on, those two things look exactly the same. In the ancient world, they might well be like, well, oh no, you're completely wrong. Those two things are massively different and have hugely different symbolism.
Interestingly, the chiton was usually linen, and the peplos, which hangs more flatly, was wool. So again, you've got the undertunic and the overtunic. But having said that, by the time of Diocletian and his famous edict, you've got, and even by the time of Martial in the 1st century AD, you've got at least 30 different words for types of hooded cloaks and cloaks with a nap or without a nap, or with lanolin or without lanolin, or with a hood or without a hood. And so although you have a limited number of garments, essentially the two tunics, the undertunic, the overtunic, and of course slaves just wore one, probably the linen undertunic. And then your cloak of whether it's a toga, which was a big pain in the butt, and they've never found one toga because, well, they probably wrapped up the dead in them after they were gone or something. But a cloak, so you've got the 3 basic pieces of clothing plus your belt and your shoes. So exactly right. As you say, they're basic pieces of clothing, but they can be in lots of nice varieties. And of course, as they evolve over into late antiquity, you start to get narrow sleeved tunics. And sometimes the tunic was just, if you imagine 2 big squares sewn together, and with a hole for the head and the hole where the arms come out. And then if you belt it, suddenly it makes sleeves with kind of bat wings, if you can imagine that.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the chitons is quite like that as well, with pins going all the way down from your shoulder to your wrist. But with the stuff about kind of different types of clothing, there's just an amazing story that I wanted to share from Herodotus, the ancient Greek historian, and he sort of gives this explanation for why female dress sort of sensibilities changed in the ancient world. And he says that it's because once there was a battle, Athens was fighting another city, and only one Athenian survived the battle, only one Athenian man. And when he comes back to Athens, all of the women are like, oh, how come you survived and our husbands didn't? And they kind of go at him in a rage and they stab him to death with the pins that link up their dresses. So it's this sort of deadly clothes where you can kill people with these pins. And Herodotus says that leads to a shift in female sort of dress sense, that they have to start wearing clothes that can be buttoned up or sewn up because they're not allowed access to their deadly clothes pins anymore. So I think that's another really cool example of how those two, to us, that change would probably be like, oh, that's very much the same thing to our eyes, but to them it was so different, and it had this really kind of interesting historical background, apparently, according to Herodotus.
Well, no, we won't change our battle tactics so that more men survive. We'll just change what the women wear so that they don't kill people.
It's the most murderous fashion statement since Crocs, isn't it, really?
Visualize like 20 women stabbing some guy with little pins that they use for their cloak. I mean, sorry, I don't buy it.
Yeah, but yeah, that's not the only deadly clothes. There are actually some more effective deadly items of clothing in the ancient world. So the story of Medea, who lots of people will know from mythology she was famous for murdering her own children to sort of get back at her husband, Jason. There's another story where, in another way to get back at him, because he leaves her to marry the princess Glauce, Medea kind of pretends to make up with Jason and then sends Glauce as a sort of wedding gift a dress and a coronet, like a little crown. And this is supposedly a gift. It's supposed to kind of, mend their problems and build bridges, but actually Medea's poisoned both the crown and the dress. So Glauce dies a very unfortunate death when she puts them on. So that's potentially a more effective clothes murder than the pins.
And I think Hercules as well dies with a horribly acidic, poisoned. I mean, that's really horrible, isn't it?
The descriptions of Hercules is a very similar one. It's, his wife, Deianira, she's tricked, I think, by the centaur Nessus, and he says if you give Hercules this shirt, which has been dipped in my blood, the blood of the centaur, it'll make him faithful to you. So again, it's interesting. We've got that similarity to the Medea story, that it's all about kind of faithfulness in marriage, and then, in fact, Nessus has tricked her and the blood is poisonous. And the description is absolutely horrible. It's like this sort of shirt thing that Hercules puts on, and it sticks to his skin and it burns through to his organs. And it sounds absolutely horrible. That would be my least favourite of those three ways to go, I think.
Okay, well, let's talk about other fashion faux pas. We've talked about murderous fashion. Let's talk about the fashion crimes. And I'm sorry to say it, and I do love mine, but sandals. I'm really keen to hear more about sandals. So I visited Vindolanda. I was very excited to go, and Xenia, you'll be able to speak more about this, but at Vindolanda they have found shoes.
Well, they're beautifully preserved, because there's the soil at Vindolanda is particularly sort of peaty. It's got we call it anaerobic. It means there's not much oxygen in the soil, and oxygen, we need it to survive, but it's also like ironically, it's also the thing that kills us slowly, because oxygen tends to destroy things. And same with old clothing. So you need, if you want to preserve something, you need to put it in an anaerobic and non-oxygenated situation. That's where we've got these shoes. So yeah, some of them are very, very small indeed, and I think those might be children's shoes, because sometimes officers would have or soldiers would have families, not necessarily living with them in the camp, but sometimes there'd be a vicus, a little village that sort of springs up next to the camp with all of their families in. So sometimes we've found little children's shoes.
Thank God for that. I just thought I had freakishly big feet.
You can find them in London too, because in the Mithraeum, which is in the basement of Bloomberg's new office building by Bank Tube Station, that was the Walbrook, and that was anaerobic as well. So they found lots of sandals and shoes from London that you can actually just see if you're in London.
Am I right in thinking in archaeology, quite often the only remnants of shoes you're left with are boot nails?
Yeah, hobnails are famous. And in fact, my husband and I were invited to Nîmes a few years ago to they have a huge reenactment event every summer in the ancient amphitheater there. And he was dressed up as a Gaul because he's got slightly reddish hair. So he spent several months growing a mustache to look like a Gaul and letting his hair grow down to almost his shoulders. And a friend of ours who's really, really strict he's one of these brilliant reenactors who forges his own armor and stuff like that.
Whoa.
He provided my husband with hobnail shoes. And as we were proceeding through the streets of Nîmes, which is cobbles, my husband realized that you lose hobnails just walking around all the time.
Sorry, you speak about your husband growing out the moustache just for a special occasion. Reminded me of, I suppose we're talking about clothing, but could we veer into fashion a little bit and talk about men's facial hair grooming? Because I know that in recent history, beards have gone in and out of fashion, and sideburns and moustaches. Barney?
Beards are big business in the ancient Near East. I think they're like the key symbol of masculinity, and they really took a long time over their beards. I don't know if anybody listening has seen the Neo-Assyrian reliefs in the British Museum, which is one of the later Mesopotamian empires, but all of the kings and the soldiers and the scribes and almost any man who appears in those pictures has like an intricately curled beard, very long, often bound together with a woven strap, embellished and well oiled. All of these things, they really took a long time caring for their beards, and it really shows from the artwork that we can see from the later periods.
I think we mentioned in a previous episode that was it Cleopatra who was depicted with a beard because she was a strong leader and she had to be depicted with a beard.
We had talked about the beard as a symbol of the pharaoh and of the god Osiris in ancient Egypt. And so, yeah, the few female pharaohs that there were, including Hatshepsut, it's a bit of a tongue twister. She's depicted with a false beard as well, because it was one of the key images of being a pharaoh, and you couldn't sort of depict yourself as one without one, even if you weren't kind of biologically disposed to grow one yourself.
Maybe I should stop plucking my stray hairs then, if it's such a symbol of gravitas.
It's a big power move.
I should leave them alone then.
Thinking along similar lines to what you're asking about, hairstyles and grooming and fashion and stuff like that. There's one particular item from Mesopotamian history that stood out when I was doing a bit of research for this episode, which is a golden helmet, and it's a really beautiful piece, and it's from the first dynasty of Ur being one of the great cities of the ancient Near East. It's a Sumerian city, so down in the south of Mesopotamia, and they have that big ziggurat, the sort of step pyramid down there. And one of the kings or princes of Ur was called Mes-Kalam-Dug, and he had this amazing helmet. It's made of electrum, which is a naturally occurring alloy of gold and silver, and it was so detailed that it had his hairstyle built into the metal.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah, so you would put this thing on your head and it would be like you weren't wearing a helmet, because you can see his parting, you can see the basically top knot or the bun at the back of his head, you can see the band holding it all in place, and you can see the ringlets from his sideburns down the side as well. And it's this really fine piece of metalwork, and it's amazing.
My fascination with this helmet is that he was like, I've got two problems. One is that I want to look fresh as heck. And the second is that I've just got my hair how I want it. How do I combine these two things to have a really cool helmet, but also let everyone know that my haircut is fly?
Etymological quiz for all of you and our listeners. Which famous emperor was named after a type of cloak?
Oh, I know that Caligula was named Little Boots.
Yep, he's named after the shoes.
So he's named after the shoes. Any other takers?
I'll give you a clue. He was a later emperor, and some famous baths are named after him.
Caracalla?
Yes, well done.
So there's like a Roman emperor named after almost a whole outfit here.
Yeah, we could do a whole episode on Roman emperors named after clothing.
Can put them all in order, like heads, shoulders, knees, toes.
If we're doing etymology hour, you guys all know kohl, the black eye makeup.
Mm-hmm.
Kohl. So that is an Akkadian etymology, all the way back to thousands of years ago in the ancient Near East. They had then their word for it, guhlu, which is Guhlu. So you can see the form of our word kohl in there as well, which is Kohl. And it's the same thing. It's antimony. Is it a metal? I think antimony ground up and used as black eye makeup. And it's also where we get alcohol from. It's come into English as a doublet, a linguistic doublet, which is when the same word in a parent language is borrowed twice into a child language. So it comes to us both as kohl and as alcohol, in the sense of something being ground up and made into a solution in water.
I've had both streaming down my face at the end of a good night. So I love that connection. I love word meanings.
I'm pretty sure that lining your eyes with that black stuff made it apotropic. You could reflect back the evil eye, the eye of the envious person that sends darts of poison into you. But by lining your eyes, you emphasize them so they reflect back the evil.
Also, I was going to mention this earlier when we were talking about the dyes, but isn't sepia? I think the word sepia means cuttlefish in Greek, like sepia. So, and again, I think that's something to do with the colour. So that's very much not relevant, but another link.
It's totally relevant to our fishy clothing.
I've got a couple of toga facts.
Lovely.
And in terms of male grooming as well, which we were talking about before, the Roman emperor to reintroduce the beard as a fashion statement was the Emperor Hadrian.
Of course.
Of course it was.
That stayed in fashion, I think, right the way up until Constantine. So that was a good 200 years of beard fashion.
Xenia, I know you like Hadrian famously.
Yes.
But I've heard a nasty rumor that it was to cover up a kind of skin condition he had. Can you confirm or deny that?
I cannot confirm or deny it. It's still a rumor. We don't know.
Vicious rumors.
Some people who are more favourable to Hadrian say it was a battle scar that he was covering up. But yes, I'm afraid we can neither confirm nor deny his pockmarks or his battle scar. But yeah, toga facts. So I guess it's come down to us as like the most iconic Roman garment, but it was worn by relatively few people, wasn't it, Caroline?
They hated it. It's like men hate wearing a business suit and tie and a collar and all that thing. But even worse, because it's a stupid blanket that you have to wear and it doesn't have any pins for whatever reason, no clasp or fibula.
When you think Rome, you think everyone's in a toga. I can't believe that must be one of the most against the law things. That actually they hated wearing them and it was the equivalent of dressing smart for a day in the office.
Yeah.
Well, if you kind of imagine the orator or the lawyer getting up to give his speech, and that's how they would carve him later on for posterity. And he gives his speech and he uses all the gestures that the orator has to use and everything. But at the end of it, he takes it off with a huge sigh of relief and says, just thrusts it into his slave's arm and says, fold that thing up and put it away.
So as I've learned today, he probably said, right, I need to get into something more comfortable, and that was probably just nakedness. So as we bring the episode to a close, can we talk about our highlights of today's podcast? Caroline, what was your favourite moment?
All my characters in all my books, men and women, wear coal. So I'm really thrilled to learn that the word goes way back to ancient Mesopotamia. And I just love the idea of, I mean, you know, when you see someone with in a TV show or a film with heavily made up eyes, just the eyes just draw you. So I love that fact. So thanks for that, Barney.
Thanks, Caroline. Barney, what's your favourite fact?
Oh, well, in a reciprocal way, I can throw straight back to Caroline and say that I have never once considered what Roman purple dye might smell like. And just thinking of this, the something that we associate with kind of luxury and high status to be so unpleasant smelling in reality. I think that's a wonderful kind of inversion of the status and class surrounding that. So yeah, I'm very grateful for that kind of different kind of insight into thinking of smells of the ancient world, which I haven't found myself doing much before.
Brilliant. Senya, how about you?
I really loved hearing about this incredible helmet that was like made to reflect the general's hairstyle. I thought that must have been not only like an incredible item of workmanship, but quite the statement.
It sounds really cool, doesn't it? Quite frankly. Meg, how about you?
I might have two favorite facts, I think, one of which is also the helmet. I think I would quite like a helmet with a perfect hairstyle so that I just don't have to worry, and also then protected from random attack. But my other favorite fact was Caroline's fact about pockets and the idea of using your tunic as a pocket. And I really love the idea of kind of imagining yourself and thinking, oh, I don't have any pockets, what would I do? I love the idea of kind of almost like a lived experiment into what they might have done in the ancient world. So that was my other favorite.
I absolutely loved learning that togas weren't quite as popular as I had in my head. I thought everyone would be in a toga at every available opportunity, but I now know that that's not the case, and I'm really glad to have gone against the law on that one and learnt the truth. That draws our first episode of season 2 to a close. We'd love to say a huge thanks to our guest today, Caroline Lawrence. You can follow her at Twitter at Caroline Lawrence. There's no E at the end there, so that's at Caroline Lawrence, no E at the end. You can also follow us at Against Law. That's at Against Law. We also now have a Patreon where you can grab yourself some goodies as you support the show, from having your name written by Barney in cuneiform. You can pick up some snazzy Against the Law stickers, or you can get yourself a one-of-a-kind original drawing by yours truly. So thank you so much for listening. We will catch you next time.